So we are going to sew the body. So these are the two legs. That dotted line in the middle is going to be where I end up cutting, which means I'm sewing my seams starting up here, going down, and then I'm going to turn a corner at the bottom. So the first thing I'm going to do is place this dot where the needle is. So it's going into the machine, and I'm lining it up. I'm making sure that all of this is nice and straight. I line it up and I find where that needle goes right into the top. I start just below where the white is. I want a little bit of space between where that seam starts and where the white is. So, you know, maybe the width of my finger, which is about 2 centimeters. Now I can back stitch. So I'll go forward a couple times, back a couple times, and now I can run my seam. So you can see that the edge of my presser foot is actually lining up with that center mark, and that's a great guide. I'm actually following that with my eye while this is sewing its way down. One of the things that happens as you sew your way down is the knit on top wants to stretch, and the feed dog that's pulling the fabric underneath is pulling more than what's happening on the top of the presser foot. So this can start to happen. And I don't want that because look, I'll have a hole in my foot at the end when I curl. So I'm making sure this is what we call flush. So they're butting up together. Okay, I can hold this now that I'm close to the end and make sure that that doesn't move. When I come down to the bottom and I hit the red zone, I can stop at the edge of the red zone. Now I'm going to start to turn. So I'm pushing down with my fingers. Look at how close all my fingers are, right up by that presser foot. But I'm a little nervous. Maybe I'm new to sewing and it's not curling for me as much as I want. Well, I can drop my needle, lift my presser foot, and just wiggle that project around. Now it's much happier where it is. I can keep going straight across. Maybe I want to turn again. So you can do that as many times as you feel comfortable. I'm going to sew right off, just as my needle goes off the edge. I push to back stitch into the fabric again, and then off the edge. So that's my first leg. Our first leg has been sewn. We've gone right down to the bottom and curled. Now I've taken it out of the machine, and I'm going to go back to the start. So I'm coming in. You can see that distance between the white and the gray. There's probably 2 centimeters of space. I'm going to do that again on the other side. So now when I had this side of the presser foot over here, now I've got this side of the presser foot also lining up with my dotted line down the center. That's going to be your cut line when you're done. So I'm going down the other leg. I'm going to pause, line up the bottom, but because this side has already secured it, you don't have to worry quite as much about it shifting on you. I'm going down into the red zone. At the end of the red zone, I can stop and curl. Now some of us get worried about how perfect that looks. Don't forget, once you cut and turn these right side out, because they're nice thick knits, it doesn't really matter. You play around with all the stuffing, and if it's just straight across even and not that nice curl, it's still going to look nice. So there's a little bit of a curl there. Okay, I cut my fabric. Now I have legs. So we are on the second sock. We've already done the arms because they are the exact same as how we attached the legs. So that part you're an expert on. Now we're going to focus on the tail and the ears. So let's start with the tail because it looks a lot like the arms and the legs did. We're going to go into the top and start right where the cut line is for the mouth. So I'm just marking it, dropping my needle. I'm going to back stitch, and I'm going down the length of the tail. I'm following that dotted line. As I get to the end, I'm going to gently curve, just like this side is curving. I'm just going to follow that gentle curve, and I'll get a pointy tail. When I sew just off the edge, back stitch, and I'm good. My tail is done. Now we're ready for the ear. Don't forget, when we marked this, we put a little slash on the one side to remind us not to sew this completely shut. If I sew this shut, I can't turn it right side out. So I'm going to start on this side, I'm going to go up and over, and I'm going to stop before I get to the other end. So here we go, we're going into the edge, we're starting right on the edge, right on the edge. So I'm going to back stitch off the edge. My needle went right into the great abyss. Now I can go forwards. Okay, so that center line on my presser foot is just following the markings that I made with the marker. I'm turning the corner. Remember, if it's not turning as much as I want it to, I can drop the needle, lift the presser foot, and pivot so that it's nice and straight. You might decide you don't need to do that as you're working with your fingers, it's turning it the way you want. Now I'm at that dash, so I can back up, back stitch, and I'm done my first ear. Okay, so now we have everything stitched with the machine, and our work with the machine is almost done. I can cut all these thread tags. Okay, what I'm going to do right now is cut between the two legs up to create the body. So I'm going back to that initial, the very first dotted line that I made, and I'm simply going to cut. As I'm cutting, you can see the distance between that stitched line and where I'm cutting. If it's too close, if I get right in like that, I'm going to lose it. It's going to fray, and I'm going to have a hole in my leg. So I stop there, and I open this up, and then I can turn this monkey right side out. There it goes. Helps to be patient with this stage, by the way. So we've turned the body right side out. Look at how neat those little seams are. You can see it was nice and straight. There's a spot for you to put your stuffing in. We are now going to cut the arms, the mouth, the tail, and the ears. So we follow that same pattern. Just like you cut up the middle of the legs, you follow and cut the arms. Now what's different is you get to cut those arms off completely. So I'm not going to cut my stitching because I don't want my back stitching to come undone. I'm simply cutting, so now I have two arms. I can put those to the side in my bin so I don't lose them. Don't forget, everybody has monkey parts that look the same, so it's easy to get your parts mixed up with other people's now that you're cutting them out. They're small pieces. Here's your ear. Don't forget about seam allowance. I don't want to cut right where my sewing line is, or I'll have a hole. I need to give myself some seam allowance. So that's the distance from my seam and the cut edge. Okay, that goes all the ways around. Now I can cut. Now I'm not worried about that slash. I can simply cut between the two ears. There's one ear. There's the other ear. Careful not to cut my mouth markings. There's my other ear. Now here's my tail. Again, seam allowance. Cut that little extra off, and I can cut right where the dotted line for the mouth is going to be. So now I have a tail. The last piece of this is the mouth. So I'm going back to those dotted lines, and I'm cutting out the mouth. And that last little bit I can pull off, and all my little thread tags I can get out of the way. There, now these are scraps, and you could chop these into little bits to be part of your monkey stuffing with the polyfill that we use to stuff. So here's all your pieces. They need to be turned right side out. Don't forget, these ears have a small hole to turn right side out. So you want to reach your thumb and your finger in there, and then you can find that sewn edge and just sort of wiggle it. And that helps to shape your ear. You've got that piece sitting out. You need to tuck it in. So you want to tuck it in like this. And then we have options. We can either choose to top stitch this ear so it lays flat like that if I like a big fat ear, or I could choose to put a dimple in my ear, which is going to be with the hand needle puckered like that so it can attach to the body like that. So that's the next choice that you'll have to make. So I've got this raw edge. I've turned it in like we saw before, and I'm pushing it down. Later, when I know how to hand sew, I'm going to hand sew this edge shut, and then I'm going to attach it to the body. Right now, I'm concerned with making a little top stitch so it looks more like an ear. So I'm going to take this ear over to the machine. I'm going to set it in, drop my presser foot, and a back stitch, and then I'm simply going to follow the edge, turning it around, making sort of a horseshoe. It just looks like the inside of an ear. Back stitch, and there's my ear. You have all the parts of your monkey and you are ready to start stuffing the body. Before you stuff the body, it's good to think if you've got some extra scraps in your lab and you were planning on putting those in the garbage, this is a really great spot to stuff your by slicing up, especially if you have this soft fleece from our grade 6 projects. We just chop this up and then we can mix it with our polyfill like this. So we fluff up our polyfill. What happens is when polyfill comes in a big bag, it gets shoved, it gets squished down into the bag. So our job is to fluff it back up again before we stuff the monkey. So I'm simply making what we fondly like to call monkey guts in the class, okay, by chopping all of that in there. Some of us are also in grade 6 are making pom-poms, and sometimes those little bits of yarn, little chunks of yarn, get left behind. Well, there's no reason that those can't go in there. So I have a nice fluffy salad of monkey guts. Once I've built this, I can start to stuff the body. When I go to stuff the legs, I really want to make sure that that fill has been fluffed up. Otherwise, my legs are going to be bumpy. So I take this fluffy little bit, one little bit at a time, and I stick it all the ways down to the bottom of that leg, and I just push, and I push, and I push. Once I get that little piece, I just repeat the process until the leg is full, and then I can stuff the body. Now it's time to hand sew this shut. I'm going to pin it by putting my pin in the bottom, stabbing the top and twisting the pin, and then bringing the bottom of the pin out.